Hi, I'm Teresa Bruno, the host of the Soul Talks podcast. And as I shared with you earlier, we are airing some interviews that my good friend and director, Peter Siaggas, did with me. So here's a little bit more of my journey that I'm sharing. Thank you for listening.
How long after you got married did you have kids?
Had Jordan pretty soon. It was like a year and a half.
And how'd that change your life?
I don't know if you can put words to what it's like to have your first child. I think every mom has probably felt it, but I didn't know what love was until that little boy happened to me. I think everything that wasn't good in my childhood, I wanted to make amazing for him. And James was an amazing father. The world revolved around Jordan, was what began to happen.
And then how long until your second?
Yeah. Andrew, just sunshine on wheels came 4 years later.
You continued to work.
I did. It was hard. I tried to have it all. For instance, when I got pregnant with Jordan, it was so important to me to nurse. I just really believed that was the healthiest way for a child. And I was just determined to nurse every 4 hours. So we bought a townhouse that was, 2 minutes from my office. And so, just so huge of James to see how important it was to me and to choose a place to live. That, a townhouse was not his idea of a first house in a marriage, but it was so important to me to be able to come home every 4 hours. And I worked differently because I owned my own business. And at that point, I had 2 partners. Later, I didn't. But it became really important to me with the boys that if I had to go back to work or if I had to work at home at night, fine. And I did that for my whole life. But I was going to pick them up at school. I was going to take them to school, except for Andrew, because he would throw up every time he had separation from me. And finally, in kindergarten, the principal called me and James and said, "James, you're going to have to bring the kids to school. We can't deal with Andrew's throw up anymore."
You were financially secure at that point, weren't
Mm-hmm.
you? Would it have been easier just to quit the agency, raise the kids, hang out with your mother-in-law and your sisters-in-law?
Well, quit the agency and raise my kids, yes. I just didn't have that gene.
Why? What would be, not saying that it's bad or good, why was that decision? A lot of people would have made the decision like, why am I working?
Yeah, and people said that to me all the time, even James. I think some of it, all of it, probably came from my insecurity from my childhood, and I was moved around a lot as a child. When my mother was sick and my dad, was gone, I was moved to friends and relatives and never had real great, sense of security. And so as I grew into my business and starting my business, I think one of the underlying things that drove me was I'll never be insecure again. I'll be able to make my own money. I'll be able to take care of myself no matter what happens. And I think that was probably the driving force.
But why was that important to you? To not be taken care of by somebody else?
Trust. Yeah. I trusted James immensely, but I couldn't seem to get around that bend. I had to know that I was doing things to take care of myself.
And was James supportive?
Always. James was so easy, and he always put himself second and then third and then fourth in our little family. James just got me. He knew kind of where all my wounds were and what I needed, and he wanted me to have that.
You think he could see the pain in your eyes that was familiar to him, maybe?
The places James and I were different, by the time he was at least in middle school, he was from a very wealthy family, and I was not. Um, I had a drive, that was, coming from what I had done in the music business and then starting my own company very young. I just had a light, a lit fire inside of me driving me. He didn't. He if we'd been a little bit younger, he would have just been the best stay-at-home dad. He didn't have anything to prove in business. He really had a good handle on what matters in life and time with family and those kinds of things, much more even. As much as I loved my children, I still felt so driven to work. And I tried to work it around them and have it all. And that's really hard to do. But James was family first. And, he just didn't have that burning drive for success.
And he was hiding some demons too, I would assume.
Oh, yeah. His demons were that he wasn't like his father and uncles. James walked so much more humbly and quietly in the world. He was not outgoing, and they were also outgoing, I don't know if he was or he wasn't an entrepreneur. I think he was a brilliant businessman, but he didn't have a need to go further what they had done. But in feeling like that, I think he always felt like he really disappointed his dad. His
How?
family. Well, after they sold the businesses, he ran at a number of businesses. He opened some things, he partnered with some folks, but it never took off like I guess he had hoped and everybody expected. And so I think he felt, certainly by the time he died, I think he was battling a deep sense of unworthiness.
I think a lot of celebrity kids have similar issues.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what they could do, they can never reach the level of their parents.
And he was the only son. He was expected to take over, his father's position. And yeah, I think he definitely felt shame.
So you were on top of the advertising world. You started a jewelry business.
Oh, Lord.
Tell me about that.
I smile. It was one of the greatest times of my life. So I pretty early on separated from the partners I was with and solely owned my marketing company. And I spent a lot of time in LA filming commercials. And it became a really fun part of our family's lives because I would schedule, kind of a year's worth of commercials, which you could do then. You can never do it now the way retail runs. But I'd scheduled, as many commercials as I could do from about May through September. And the boys would come out and we'd rent a house in LA for the summer. And I mean, this started when like Andrew was 4 and Jordan was 8. First, we had an office in Toronto, and then taxes shifted and California became much, better place to be doing that kind of work. So I was in LA a better part of my years for quite a while. And I always loved jewelry. My grandmother was a beautiful woman who loved jewelry. My mother was a beautiful woman, styled very differently than the way I style myself, but always like had on this great big gold cuff. I'll never forget how cool she looked in that. And I just began hanging out in the jewelry district, not with any intent whatsoever to create a business or to design anything for anybody else. I just had, as we creatives do, I just had these visions in my head of jewelry that I wanted that I didn't quite see anywhere else. And that sounds so egotistical. I don't mean it that way. I just hadn't quite found that vibe that I thought was edgy and feminine and sexy, you know. And so I just thought, well, I'll figure this out. I'll figure out how to make it for myself, you know. And that took a long time. I mean, James loved to tell this story that first summer when and poor Andrew, I was dragging him to every stall that sold pearls and diamonds. And he was like, oh, do we have to go again? You know, but James walked in, came to visit us. And I was sitting on the sofa in this house we rented and had this ginormous fishing tackle box. Well, first of all, for me to have a fishing tackle box is just antithetical because I don't do anything with fishing. And I'm sitting there and I have all these tools and all this gear and I'm trying to learn how to string pearls and tie them. And James walked in and he was just like, what has happened to my world? What are you doing? And then after I kind of figured out a few things, you just talk to people. You just ask anybody who will talk to you how to create jewelry. And I found, I had more failures than successes in about 2 years. But I found this craftsman who he barely spoke English, but we could communicate. And he got what I was trying to do, and he could take I'm not very good at drawing, but he could take what I was doing. And I would find the stones and all that sort of thing. And he taught me a lot about gold and mixing my own gold. And I mean, not me personally doing it, but finding, you know. And so I would source the materials and then show him what I wanted. And so after the second summer
When you say source of materials, you actually went to India.
I did ultimately after I started the business.
The pearls that are very rare. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, it's a fun story. I love to tell it. After that 2 years of a lot of effort and a lot of failures, I had 30 pieces I had designed, and I thought they were the most beautiful pieces in the whole world. And they were just for me. You know, they were things that I loved and wanted. And so I went home really excited, and I went to visit a friend of mine who worked in the jewelry store where James bought most of my gifts. Her name is Karen. And so I just had my little 30 pieces rolled up, you know, kind of in my bag. And I pulled them out for her, and I was just so proud of my pieces, you know. And she was so sweet. She was like, Teresa, I think you need to take these pieces to New York. And I know this woman who owns one of the biggest, you know, represents tons of jewelry designers, and I want you to go. I was like, why would I do that? These are my pieces. I just want them for myself. But she kind of dared me, and I said, well, if you can get the appointment, I'll go. So she got the appointment. So I arrive in New York. I am clueless about the jewelry world. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I still have my nasty little piece of velvet and my 30 pieces in my bag. And
in your tackle box.
I didn't have my tackle box with me, but I had used it. So I went to this place called Fragments, owned by Janet Goldman, and it was just fabulous. You know, there was kind of every designer you would see if you were in Saks or Bergdorf's or boutique stores. They were all there around me, and I knew I was just so in over my head. Anyway, so I laid my little pieces out on the table, and I learned later you're supposed to show them on a tray and do certain things, and I didn't know any of that. So Janet came over, and she was extremely intimidating, really tall, long red hair, and she didn't speak to me. She just starts picking up my things and looking at them, you know. And I was starting to shake, and I thought, why am I shaking? I'm not here to do anything. I took a dare, you know. And finally she says, darling, you have a made hand. And I was like, okay, I get it. I think I get it. And she said, I'd like for you to do 50 more pieces for me. I want to represent you. Can you get me 50 more pieces in 2 weeks? And I'm like, you know, you can read everything on my face. I nearly just spit on her. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I have wasted your time. I really shouldn't have come here. I'm not an incorporated business. I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't know how to get you 50 more pieces. And so just left the meeting. And she called me back and she said, no, you really have something. You have something special. I'd really like to represent you. And, you know, when I talked to James, I was very unsure about it. I had never started to sell. I was just using that creativity that is in me to create something beautiful. Well, she paired me with this young, really hungry PR person. And the very first interview, this was like 2 weeks later, went back to New York. Janet said, just sit down and talk to Danielle and y'all go see some people. And so the very first interview was at the New York Times office. And again, I'm so green. I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't have a story. I don't know how to tell you jewelry language or anything like that. But so these young girls, young editors, just asked me some questions. And so, well, I was just very inspired by my grandmother and my mom. And it's just a passion, not knowing that every single thing I said was up for grabs to be printed. Go back home, still haven't incorporated, have not made any more pieces. And it was a Sunday morning. I'll never forget it. James and I were sitting in the little area off of our kitchen having coffee. Phone rings and it's Karen and she's screaming in my ear. Did you know you're on the front page of the Sunday Times style section? And I just was like, whoa, what just happened? And it wasn't a little article. It was a quarter page and it said, not your grandmother's jewelry. Well, within 2 days after that, Mrs. Obama's stylist called and said, can Mrs. Obama wear these pieces that were in the New York Times to a state dinner in Chile? And I said to her assistant, well, sure. And so she said, well, what's the name of the business? And I said, I don't have a business. I'm not incorporated. She said, oh, well, Mrs. Obama can't wear your pieces because that would be like taking a gift. She can only wear pieces from a company and then, give them back to you. And so that was the push, it made me incorporate because I was so excited about it. Well, then she wore the pieces, fashion bloggers wrote about it, domino effect just starts swirling. And so after she wore the pieces and the bloggers wrote about it, there were stores calling and a lot of stores calling. And so I had to just jumpstart a business I really didn't know anything about. Had to learn manufacturing and inventory controls and hire people and train people. And all the while I'm running a fairly sizable marketing firm. So the press drove the business at first. It was crazy. In my first year, I was probably on the cover. The jewelry was on the cover of, Harper's Elle. I was in Robb Report. I put it on Oprah a million times. The press was crazy. And so even though the jewelry business is really hard, I had this incredible press driving it, and they were putting it on celebrities. So Oprah wore it a lot, and Jennifer Hudson and Pink and Julia Roberts, it was like otherworldly. It was like I was in a movie. And all the backstory of that is hard. Learning to do something like that you don't really know anything about is really, really hard. The part
while running a major agency.
Yes. And I was, in the agency, I was on the creative side. So kind of the creative nexus for both of these companies. And I never had any trouble coming up with designs. That was just part of me. New ideas. I never struggled with that kind of thing, but running the jewelry business was really, really hard. And
hiring the right people.
So difficult. And I'm in Birmingham, Alabama doing it instead of being in LA or New York where people knew jewelry, they knew. But looking back, I take a lot of responsibility for my downfall because I wasn't present enough. I was running two businesses and running so hard. I didn't see what was happening right underneath my eyes. A friend and a really trusted employee I'd hired had been committing fraud for about 2 years. And by the time it surfaced, it was so big. It was fraudulent credit cards. It was all kinds of bills that...
He was opening a bunch of credit cards in your business's name, cashing them out and not paying the bills, right?
He wasn't paying the bills, and yet he was falsifying all the QuickBooks. Our accountant, huge accounting firm, had a very hard time even discovering it because he was masterful. And he, if you're told you have this much money and this is what's coming in and this is what's going out. I felt like I was running a tight little business, and then I had $1 million worth of fraud. And I was devastated. I was heartbroken. I felt like such a failure. I was like, how?
What year was this? 2020?
2019.
19. And then COVID hit.
Well, more than that, just as that was all happening, and I was trying to figure out, can I pay back all this and still have money for new production? Is there any way to keep this company going? James died. And I didn't have any fight left. I couldn't have designed anything.